the house that doesn't let you leave. It started with an innocuous post. An Airbnb listing, something that seemed like an ideal weekend getaway, a retreat from the humdrum of daily life, a peaceful haven tucked away in a quiet corner of the world. For friends, weary from the weight of their mundane lives, were drawn to this place. The photos on the website were simple. An old farmhouse on the outskirts of a sleepy town, with heavy wooden beams and a porch that creaked under the weight of age. The reviews were sparse but positive, nothing to hint at the horror that lay beneath. A peaceful stay in the countryside, the perfect escape, read one. Cozy, rustic, with everything you need to relax. Highly recommend. There was one review that stood out, buried in the middle of the others, written by someone who had stayed there months before. The reviewer's name was Avery, and their words were disjointed, as though they had been typed in a rush, in an almost manic frenzy. Do not go here. Whatever you do. It's not just the house. It's what's in it. It follows you. But they didn't heed the warning. It was a fleeting thought, dismissed in favor of the many glowing reviews. And so, one late afternoon they arrived at the farmhouse. There was a palpable sense of isolation when they pulled up. The driveway was a winding path overgrown with weeds, and the farmhouse loomed before them like a forgotten relic. The paint was chipped, the windows darkened with grime, and the air smelled of mildew and decay. Still, the sense of dread was faint. It wasn't enough to stop them from entering. The door creaked open with a slow, agonizing groan. Inside, the house was silent, almost too quiet. The wooden floorboards groaned beneath their feet as they made their way through the dimly lit hallway. It was a time-worn place, but nothing seemed unusual at first. They unpacked and settled in. There was nothing inherently wrong. But the longer they stayed, the more something felt off. The first night, it was the silence. No hum of insects outside, no breeze whispering through the cracks in the walls. Just the sound of their own voices echoing in the cold, lifeless rooms. But that was easy to dismiss. Old houses, after all, were full of strange noises. The second night was worse. Lena, the most adventurous of the group, was the first to experience it. She had gone to bed early, exhausted after a long drive. But around midnight, she awoke to the sound of whispers. Low, guttural murmurs just beyond the edge of hearing. At first, she thought it was just the wind or the creaking of the house settling. But then it came again, closer, more distinct. Lena? The whisper came from the corner of her room, from the darkness that seemed to gather like a presence. She froze, too terrified to move, her breath shallow. The words felt wrong. They were not spoken by a human voice, but something older. Something that had been here far longer than she had. She snapped on the light, her heart pounding in her chest, but there was nothing. Just the stillness. The room was empty, save for her trembling form. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, but when she tried to fall back asleep, she felt it. A cold hand brushing against her neck, a chill that crawled down her spine. The third night, things escalated. It was Mark this time, the most skeptical of the group. He was convinced Lena was just hearing things, that the house was old, that the sounds were simply the wind. But when he went into the living room around 3 a.m., he found the fireplace had been relit. The logs burned with an unnatural blue flame, flickering and dancing in a way that no fire could ever do. And there, sitting in the flickering shadows, was a figure. A man hunched over, dressed in old, tattered clothes. His back was to Mark, but his head was tilted in a way that suggested he was aware of Mark's presence, even though he hadn't moved. Mark's voice caught in his throat. He should have turned away, but something compelled him to take a step closer. "Who's there?" Mark asked, his voice shaking. The figure didn't respond, but the air grew thick, suffocating. It felt as though the room was closing in on him, every breath harder than the last. Then, with terrifying slowness, the figure turned its head. It wasn't human. The face was hollow, like something shapeless, its features twisted into a grotesque, impossible form, as if the very nature of reality had unraveled before him. Mark couldn't move. He couldn't scream. He couldn't even look away. And then the voice came again, but this time it was louder, inside his mind. "You shouldn't have come." He stumbled backward, falling over the coffee table, knocking the old lamp to the floor. The figure stood and moved toward him. But as it did, its form began to distort, elongating, twisting as if made of shadows. And then, in a blink, it vanished, leaving only the suffocating silence behind. The others came running when they heard the crash, but Mark could barely explain what had happened. He was a shell of himself, pale and shaking, unable to speak in coherent sentences. All he could say was one word over and over: "It's here. It's watching." They thought he was losing his mind. Until they all saw it. It started with a faint shadow in the corner of the room. Something that didn't belong, something that had never been there before. It moved when they weren't looking, skittering across the walls, crawling across the floor, always just out of sight but never gone. And then the whispers began. Soft at first, like the rustle of dry leaves, but growing louder, closer, until they could no longer ignore them. "You can't leave." The words echoed through the house, curling around their minds, sinking deep into their consciousness. But the door wouldn't open. The windows wouldn't budge. And outside, the night was waiting. "Do you hear that? You think you're alone, don't you? You think you're safe, far from that farmhouse, tucked safely in your home. But listen closely. Can you hear the whispers? Can you feel the presence just beyond your door? You shouldn't have listened. You shouldn't have come here. The thing has found you now, hasn't it? This is where the nightmare begins. Don't turn around, because it's already there. You may think you've made it through the night. You may have brushed off the fear that lingered, thinking it was just the echo of your imagination, whispering through the dark corners of your mind. But if you've been listening closely, you'll already know, it's too late. The house doesn't let go. Mark, Lena, and the others tried to escape. They ran for the door, frantic, desperate, their hearts pounding as they clawed at the handle. But the door wouldn't open. Not a single inch. It was as if the house itself was alive, pushing back, holding them inside, keeping them locked within its cursed embrace. That's when the shadows came again. At first, it was only a faint distortion in the air, like the brief flicker of a dying candle. But then the shapes began to form, oozing out of the walls, creeping along the floor like thick, crawling oil. They moved silently, fluidly, twisting and bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. No matter how many times they tried to escape through the windows, no matter how much they screamed for help, the house had already heard them. The whispers were louder now, clearer. The words they spoke weren't in any language they knew, yet they understood them perfectly. "Stay, stay forever." Mark, who had been the first to feel the malevolent presence, clutched his head in agony. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, as if the very essence of reality was unraveling around him. He gasped for air, but it was as if the house itself was suffocating him, closing in on his chest with every breath. And then, in the stillness, the figure appeared once again. It was in the corner as it had been before. Only this time it was clearer. More real. The darkness that shaped its form no longer danced in the shadows. It was right there in front of them. Moved. The hollow, twisted face grinned, its eyes two black voids that seemed to pull in all the light around them. But there was something new this time, something far worse. The figure stepped forward, and as it did, the house groaned. The walls seemed to breathe as if the building itself was alive with hunger. A sickening pulse ran through the floors, vibrating in their bones. And the air became thick with an unnatural stench, decay, rot, something foul and ancient that clung to the inside of their throats. It spoke then. Its voice wasn't a whisper, it was inside their minds. "You woke me up. You broke the seal." Lena tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest, a suffocating force that made her wish she could disappear. But she couldn't. She couldn't escape. The figure's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment she knew, it knew everything. The dark presence had been in the house long before them. It had been here for generations, lurking in the silence, waiting for the moment when someone would disturb it. And now that they were trapped, there would be no going back. The thing stepped closer to Mark. His body trembled violently as if his very soul were being pulled from his skin. "You cannot leave. None of you can." Lena looked to the others, but they were already lost, blank eyes staring, their bodies swaying as though under the control of the figure. It had them now, had all of them, and there was nothing she could do to save them. They weren't even human anymore, just empty shells filled with that ancient, suffocating darkness. But what was worse, Lena realized with a sickening jolt, was that she wasn't alone either. The shadow had moved. It was behind her now, breathing down her neck, its cold breath crawling across her skin, its fingers curling around her spine. It was there, in the very room with them. And as she turned to face it, she could see the reflection of her own terrified eyes in the black, hollow pits that made up its face. "You are mine now," it whispered, its voice dripping like venom. Suddenly there was a loud crack. The house itself seemed to split open, as if the walls were being torn apart by something beyond human comprehension. A deep, unearthly growl reverberated through the floors. The air shifted, thickened, until it was impossible to breathe. The very atmosphere seemed to bend and warp around them. But then it stopped. Dead silence. Lena's heart raced as she scanned the room. Her friends, once with her, were gone. The figure had taken them, consumed them entirely. And she was now alone with it. The door, the one that had never opened, suddenly creaked. A soft, mocking sound as if the house was toying with her. It beckoned her to approach. But she couldn't, she knew better. And that's when the final truth hit her with such force it nearly shattered her mind. The house had never been meant for them to leave. They weren't guests. They weren't even people. They had been chosen. You are a part of it now. You will never leave. The walls seemed to pulse again, and Lena felt the weight of them close in. The house had marked her. She had heard the whispers. She had seen the figure. And now it was too late. Her eyes darted to the door. But the door, that once simple wooden thing, was now no longer a door. It was something else. Something that didn't want her to pass through, something that wanted her to remain, to stay forever. And she felt it then, the creeping sense that the house wasn't just a building. It was an entity. A living, breathing force that wanted her to become a part of its nightmare. The door was closing. But not just the door. Everything was closing. The house, the walls, the darkness, and there was nowhere to run. Now you might think you're safe. You're sitting in your room in your safe, warm space, but I warn you, the house is still listening. Every word you've read, every shadow you've imagined, every chill down your spine, it's real. It's still there. And it's waiting. It's already found you. Do you hear the whispers? You can never leave. Because once you hear this, it knows you. It knows you like it knew them. And now, it's coming for you too. Thank you for watching, but it's too late. You've invited it in. Don't say I didn't warn you.